Hello and welcome back. This is the third segment of our Aki podcast. This is Team Tachiai talking to you. This is Bruce Henderson, associate editor, Andy Martin, the creator, and Josh, our man in foreign lands, all joining together to talk about the upcoming tournament. It's the September tournament. It's the fall tournament. It's the one they call Wacky Aki, and I hope that some fun and unusual and unexpected things happen. But let's dive into a preview. This segment's all about previewing the upcoming tournament, and there are a lot of question marks around last tournament's winner, Yokozuna Hakuho, who blazed a 15-0 perfect score to take home the cup. But you have to wonder, how much longer is he going to stay in the fight? Because, I mean, it certainly seems like the knives are still out for him. There was this whole sort of stupid, ridiculous scandal because he showed up at one of the events during the Olympics. He's got a member of his stable that's got COVID, and maybe they're going to make the whole stable sit out. I mean, the swirl around Hakuho just gets more grandiose and more stupid with each passing cycle. Or am I overreacting, Josh?
I think the truth is somewhere in between. I mean, as far as how much longer he's going to be in the fight, look, his stable master is retiring next August, so no more than 6 more tournaments at the most before he's surely going to take that over, because there's no one else to take it over. And with all the people that he's recruited into that stable, they're surely not going to be moving to some other stable, so it doesn't make sense. So, he's got at most a year. With respect to the scandals, if you like, and all this other kind of stuff,
the swirl.
The social media discussion and even some of the conversation from the Sumo Association and the Yokozuna Deliberation Committee, there were things that happened in that last tournament that certainly were not the behavior that was expected of a Yokozuna. We talk about the match against Shodai, where he did what Tobizaru basically did to him back to Shodai, and didn't take the Tachiai head on and embarked in a weird match. We can talk about Shodai a little bit more in a minute, against someone who doesn't have any kind of serious Tachiai game plan or whatever. And then, you mentioned the episode at the Olympics, and then also his epic celebration at the end of the tournament. A lot of this stuff is just a storm in a teacup, and some of it actually has substance. And, we all have friends, and in Andy's case, perhaps family in Japan, I don't know. But if you actually talk to people in Japan, no one cares about the stuff with him showing up no one cares that he showed up at the Olympics. It's a non-story. In sumo context, his behavior on the doyo is what's open for critique and open for criticism. And when you read a lot of the commentary online, particularly some of the louder comments from the international community on sumo Twitter, I think the thing that is a little off of when people talk about Hakuho is now there's this narrative of, the Sumo Association is going to come down on him, and the Sumo Association wants him out, and, he's not going to be respected at the same level as some of these other guys who retired recently, et cetera, and so on. And it just goes back to something that we've been talking about on the site for years, which is that the Sumo Association is not comprised of 100 guys who all think the same. These are vastly different people comprising different generations who have different thoughts about what is and is not appropriate. And that was expressed in the comment that came out after the tournament. And a lot of people made it very clear that, the way that he acted in his match against Shodai was not becoming of a Yokozuna, and that they didn't really get excited about the way that he celebrated on the last day. But when he got out of the doyo on the last day and made it to the Shitakubeya, who was the first guy in there fist bumping him to congratulate him for his title? It was his former rival, former Kiseno Sato. So, people have celebrated wins in sumo in the past. It's not just Hakuho this time. As Inside Sport Japan posted, they will do it again in the future. So there's no one right answer here. He has misbehaved. He has also excited people. and hopefully he'll be there the full 15 days this time.
So I will own up to the fact that my attitude towards Hakuho and what he does is most definitely not aligned with Japanese pop culture or Japanese sumo culture. I am a raging barbarian, and I fully embrace that fact. So with that on the record books, Andy, do you want to add anything on the Hakuho story, or should we all just shut up and watch him win again?
Well, no, I'm just very curious to see whether he's going to have the big shift in the narrative that Kakuryu had when he retired. Because before Kakuryu retired, there was a lot of pressure on him for, dude, you're so injured all the time. You're such a laggard. You're not participating. I'm very curious to see if when the year is up, because I do think he'll go another year, on the dohyo, when his career ends, we'll have a very exciting period with Terunofuji up there, and I think that when he retires, there's going to be a bit of a shift in the narrative where people are going to be kind of excited about him and endeared toward him in a way that they weren't when he was active, and especially as he's already kind of a stable master himself,
yep,
bringing up a lot of recruits. We're getting the first glimpses of the successes that he's going to have in his next career. And so I think that a lot of those sumo scandals are just way overblown, and
it's because they have nothing else to talk about. Let's face it.
Pretty much.
All right, so let's roll on to something perhaps a little more visceral, and that's one of my favorites, which is Ozeki Takakesho, who is deeply kadoban going into this tournament, possibly with some sort of lingering neurological injury. And I don't know, Josh, do you think that that we're going to see much out of Takakeisho this time out, or is it going to be 8 wins and done?
I hope it's 8 wins and done. I hope he can get to 8 wins. You just don't know. I mean, he's someone who we were talking about the last time that we did these podcasts a couple months ago and saying, could he complicate the run for Yokozuna? And now we're sitting here thinking, is he going to be in a well enough state to even be an Ozeki over the long term? We don't know. So I think we've had to revise our expectations for who he is and what he can be.
Yep.
And not even just in this last tournament, but when you look at his body of work as an Ozeki, he's someone who can show up and challenge or even win a yusho, but he's also someone who is injured with that body in a worrying frequency. And so what the long-term prognosis is for him, we don't know. And this tournament, I think we'd all be happy to see him get to 8. And if he doesn't, that's going to be very complicated for the long-term Sanyaku outlook, I think.
I would tend to agree. Andy, the wave action man, do you think he's going to clear kadoban this time?
I'm very worried that he might not. I really hope he does, but this instance with Ichinojo is not the first time that we've seen him go down with something. Like there was the injury that he had maybe 18 months ago or something.
Pectoral.
Where he started shake. Well, there was one where he started kind of shaking there on the dohyo, and it was kind of scary. And then to see when he hit Ichinojo this time, Ichinojo kind of he was bracing him and supporting him as he took him off the dohyo. I mean, it was very disconcerting. I'm really hopeful that maybe he will be able to avoid aggravating that injury in the future and have a successful, not just this basho, but another longer career. But it is pretty worrying right now.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Team Tachiai worrying about Ozekis. Where have you heard that before? Okay, so on to that. And keeping with the theme, let's talk about one of my favorite whipping boys, and that's Shodai. So Shodai showed up at combo practice and was basically like a big fluffy carnival prize for a while. And he got called out by the Sumo Association elders for his sort of un-Ozeki approach. And then he got hurt. Takayasu took him to task. And boy, oh boy, what a silly thing to do, because it's like we know Takayasu has inhuman stamina. And in their final match, there was a bit of an armbar throw that that may have injured his elbow, and so he did not appear again in combo practice. Josh, thoughts about Shodai? Do you think that he's had enough time to recover, or is this going to be a rough run for him?
Listen, I think the yusho that he had last year was incredible. He improved a lot. He was deserving of the rank when he got promoted. But in spite of that, as I alluded to in a previous iteration of this podcast a few minutes ago, he makes Goeido look like a positively dominant and authoritative Ozeki. And, I think the lack of respect that was afforded to him by Hakuho in the previous tournament kind of tells you what you need to know about him as an Ozeki. Last tournament, I believe, was the first tournament that he did not immediately have a losing record again after clearing kadoban in the previous tournament. It's just really hard for me to look at this upcoming tournament and say, yeah, he's someone who I expect to have a dominant winning record. When you look at who his opponents are going to be in the top of Maegashira, I mean, these are not necessarily people that we have a lot of expectations for, but you can see Hoshoryu beating him. You can see Kiribayama beating him, Hokuto Fuji, maybe even Kota Noaka or Wakatakage. I can't sit here and say that Shodai is the out-and-out favorite in any of those matches right now, especially given, Bruce, as you said, he kind of limps out of the combination practice with a few days to go before the tournament. A lot of it's mental, and a lot of it is lack of game plan, and he's incredibly strong, but this new crop that's coming up there right now are incredibly technical. So I think that he's got to bring a little bit more brains to some of these fights if he's going to last as an Ozeki for too much longer.
So let's take the other side of that combo practice, and that was Takayasu, who, he looks great in practice. He's always looked great in practice, but he's lost his sparring partner, who's now moved to the rump end of Ibaraki. Andy, thoughts about Takayasu, or as some now call him Papayasu, because there are some absolutely charming pictures of him showing up on the web with his little baby daughter, which they melt your heart, right? Big, hairy monster guy with this little tiny baby, and he's feeding him. Anyhow, back to sumo. Andy, thoughts about Takayasu?
Well, he's probably the one former Ozeki who is most likely to regain Ozeki status. His latest Ozeki run came to an end with that little. He would have had to have won the last yusho, I believe, in order for him to technically be even considered for it. But his Ozeki run, he'll have to start from zero with this one. I'm pretty optimistic that
you are always optimistic about it.
Yeah, I think that especially the way that he was just dominating Shodai in that combo practice, the ways that he was winning, he was just forcing Shodai around the dohyo, and Shodai's only 2 wins in that practice or 3 were kind of quick slap down bouts, and he didn't really. I guess Takayasu demonstrated a lot of power and skill that we know he has, but we've been a little bit worried about the power with his own injury. I think he's recovered, and I'm excited about this tournament with him.
So, Josh, I can see that you're bursting with enthusiasm to say something about Takayasu.
No, I love it. Andy always gives us one crazy one in every podcast. I think this is whatever your prediction is, your incredible prediction is definitely going to happen. I think that for Takayasu, I actually think it's going to be a real struggle for him to even stay in Sanyaku. I think, he's probably the person who gets hurt the most by former Kisano Sato Araiso Oyakata opening up his new stable because they famously practiced with each other
endlessly.
Nonstop, and Takayasu's lost his sparring partner now. Everybody else who he has to practice with in the Heian when he's not doing those combination practices are guys that are way down the divisions. Taganora, as Bruce mentioned in an earlier segment, just doesn't have a lot. He's never been a good recruiter and doesn't have a lot of talent. in that stable. He inherited Kisano Sato and Takayasu. So, Takayasu's made some good noises about, wanting to train hard to bring up the youngsters in the stable. But I think that transition for him in Araiso Yakata leaving is going to be hard physically for him. I think it's going to be hard mentally for him,
Yep.
Even though we've all been saying, oh, why have you been practicing all the time with a guy who's been retired for 2 or 3 years? I just think he's still got excellent technique. And as you say, his physicality seems to be coming back. But as he alluded to after the previous tournament, and we started Kyujo, he has, at his age now in his early 30s, physical problems that he has to manage.
Yep.
And I think losing that sparring partner and coming up against the Hoshoryus, the Kiribayamas, Wakataka Kage, etc., it's going to be a challenge. But having said that, Andy could be right.
Oh, man.
He could go 13-2. Who knows? But I just think it's going to be a struggle for him to hold on to Komusubi.
All right, so I think this makes for an excellent segue into our always enjoyable, world-famous, regrettable predictions. And for those of you new to the podcast, because we keep getting new people every time we do this, we try to predict things that will happen, including who's going to win. And usually within the first 3 days, we regret anything we've said completely. So take everything you're about to hear at full comedic value. Andy, you always tell the biggest, craziest predictions. So what do you have for us this time out?
All right. Well, the first one is not. I'll go with the yusho one second. But my first prediction is that Endo is going to tear up the lower ranks of this division. He's down there, much lower than his talent, and because of his last Kyujo. And so I think that he could potentially be in the running for the yusho in the second week, but I don't think he's going to win it. I think it's going to go to Mitakeumi, because Mitakeumi he knows all of these guys. He can beat everybody up there among the Joijin and in Sanyaku. Hakuho, with so many question marks around Hakuho, Terunofuji, Shodai, Takakeisho, like Takayasu, Ichinojo, all of these guys have so many question marks. Mitakeumi can finally prevail.
Wow. That's a big one. All right, Josh, where do you take it next? Regrettable predictions, please.
It's funny. I tipped Mitakeumi in one of the last two, and he made me instantly regret that.
That's what it's for.
That's why it's called this. I would love to see that, but I actually agree with everything else that Andy said. I think Endo, again, will be strong into week 2, especially given his position. In terms of another challenger, I don't think this guy's going to win it, and I hate that I'm even saying this because it's just going to fuel all these people on the internet who drive me insane. But I do actually think Maegashira 1 Hoshoryu is going to have an excellent tournament.
Oh, wow.
I think that he could get 10 plus. I don't think he's going to be Yusho right, but I think he will take the next step. And I just think it's just because of everybody else around him not really having that same kind of fire and that same kind of motivation.
Wow.
In terms of a Yusho winner, I am going to go with Yokozuna West, Terunofuji.
Yes.
And for that is because, as it has been documented fairly liberally around the internet, Yokozuna, first tournament after promotion, do not typically, win or maybe even challenge for the Yusho. But I think he has a little bit of unfinished business from the way that last tournament ended against Hakuho. I think that will motivate him to come out and grab a Yusho. And I also think, as we talked about previously in these segments today, I don't think that he's someone who's very long for the rope in the long-term kind of context. As Bruce mentioned earlier, he's already obtained his Japanese nationality. It may have been Andy. The great thing about him becoming Yokozuna now is that you don't have to worry about him obtaining Kabu. He's got his 5 years after he retires. Well, guess what? His stable master is going to retire in the next 5 years, and so there will be a slot that comes open for him. So now it's like bonus time, and I think that with that pressure being off, he can take the motivation of that unfinished business in the last tournament and really challenge to win this one, which I think would be great.
All right, so I'll close out the regrettable predictions, and I'm sure I will regret them. I do believe that Hakuho will be COVID Kyujo. I believe the entire Heya will sit out Aki, much to everyone's disappointment, because everybody wants to see the rematch between Terunofuji and Hakuho, and I certainly do. I think Yutaka Yama, who is back in the top division, is going to have an excellent tournament. I think that in spite of the fact that Shodai's been injured, he may, in fact, shine through as the stronger of those two from that stable, finally. I think Tobizaru is going to have a shitty tournament and likely fall further down the Banzuke, and that Kodo Echo is probably so demoralized that he probably wants to take up fishing. But I'm going to agree with Josh on the Terunofuji prediction for the yusho. I think that I don't think the fact that he lost to Hakuho rattled him at all. He continues to show massive focus, a lot of poise. Hakuho won't be there because he'll be Kyujo, and there will be no one who can actually touch him. And I think with that, that's going to bring our podcast for Aki Basho to a close. I want to thank Tachiai creator Andy Martin and our man in foreign lands, Josh, for joining us for this. And thank you, folks, for sticking with us. And remember, for Sumo, it's Tachiai.